Did you know that the world's first organized fire department was actually founded by a Roman emperor? And get this, its funding came from a tax on the sale of slaves.
Wow, that's quite a start.
Or how about this? For nearly 1,000 years after Rome, organized firefighting pretty much vanished, gone, only to be, reborn from one of history's most devastating fires.
It really sets the stage, doesn't it?
It does. Today, on Seeking History, we're embarking on an incredible journey through the trial by fire. We're exploring the epic evolution of firefighters.
From ancient ingenuity right up to modern-day heroes.
Exactly. We'll uncover how this essential role, mirrored the growth of civilization itself.
It's truly an epic of adaptation. We're not just talking about a job, are we? It's more like a fundamental human impulse.
Yeah.
Confronting chaos with courage.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And we'll see how firefighters evolved from just reactive laborers into these multidisciplinary professionals, basically the community's safety net.
Right.
We'll unpack those critical turning points. The first brigades in ancient Rome, then that regression in the Middle Ages.
The long gap.
Exactly. Then the reemergence driven by capitalism, believe it or not, and insurance. And that unique volunteer spirit in colonial America.
And then there's the technology, how things like the steam engine or modern breathing apparatus totally changed the game, forcing a shift towards professional department.
Absolutely. And we'll look at the huge mission expansion in the 20th and 21st centuries, firefighters becoming all hazards responders.
Handling everything from EMS calls to hazmat incidents. So what does this all mean for us today? How did these historical shifts really shape the world we live in?
Well, let's start at the beginning. Our journey kicks off in the ancient world. That's where the very first attempts at organized fire control popped up.
Before Rome, even.
Oh, yeah, long before Rome.
Yeah.
We've got archaeological evidence pointing to the Egyptian siphona, basically a hand-operated water pump.
Okay, a hand pump. Simple, but a start.
It was. A monumental conceptual leap, really, from just passing buckets down a line. It shows an early grasp of needing more efficient water delivery for the common good.
So the Egyptians had the basic pump, but the Greeks took it further, right?
Yeah, they did. Around 250 BCE, you have this brilliant Greek inventor, the Ctesibius of Alexandria. He dramatically improved on the siphona.
How so?
He developed a much more sophisticated double-action force pump. Meticulously engineered, bronze cylinders, the works.
Wow. Not just a toy, then.
Definitely not. These pumps were actually deployed in major Greek cities. They had designated team to operate them. So you see technology driving organizational change even way back then.
Okay, that's fascinating. But Rome, initially, they had a totally different system. I heard about Marcus Licinius Crassus.
Ah, Crassus, yes. His approach was, let's say, different. He ran a private fire brigade, about 500 slaves.
Private, so for hire.
Exactly. But it was predatory. They wouldn't fight a fire until he'd haggled with the property owner over the price.
You're kidding. What if they didn't agree?
He just let it burn. Sometimes he'd even buy the ruined property afterwards for, pennies on the dollar.
That's unbelievable. Talk about a conflict of interest.
It really highlights how crucial public safety is, doesn't it? And why you probably can't leave it purely to market forces. Crassus proved that public safety needs a public solution.
So that predatory model clearly wasn't working for the city as a whole. How did Rome finally make the shift?
Well, after a series of really bad fires in Rome, Emperor Augustus Caesar had had enough. In 6 AD, he took decisive action.
What did he do?
He established the Cohortes Vigilum, the Corps of Vigils. This was the world's first organized, publicly funded municipal fire department.
The first ever, funded by the state.
The very first. By taking control, Augustus' imposed order protected the city's assets. Basically proved that a functioning city needed centralized safety infrastructure.
And the funding. You mentioned the slave tax earlier.
That's right, a 4% tax on the sale of slaves. It's a sobering detail about how Roman society worked, but that's how they funded this vital service.
So what were the vigils like? Just firefighters?
Oh, much more. This wasn't just a works project, it was state building. They're a sophisticated paramilitary force. 7 cohorts. Eventually over 7,000 men strong.
7,000. Huge.
And get this. Recruits, who were initially freedmen, could earn full Roman citizenship after 6 years of service. A powerful path to social mobility, ensuring they had dedicated people.
Okay, so structured big incentives. What did they actually do?
They had barracks, a clear chain of command, but their duties were twofold. Think of them as ancestors of today's all-hazards department.
How so?
Their main job was firefighting, yes. But they were also Rome's night police, patrolling streets, catching thieves, even runaway slaves.
Wow, fire and police combined, what kind of gear did they have? Still buckets.
Buckets, sure, but much more. Axes, picks, ladders, grappling hooks. They had wheeled force pumps called siphos, operated by specialists. They even used water-soaked quilts to smother flames.
Sophisticated stuff.
And for really big fires, they used ballista-like catapults to tear down buildings and create fire breaks.
Using military tech for firefighting, amazing. But you mentioned this knowledge got lost.
Tragically, yes. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, poof, that sophisticated knowledge of the Vigiles, it just vanished.
Just gone.
Well, the structures that supported it collapsed. For almost 1,000 years, Europe took a massive step backward in firefighting. It regressed to really basic, often futile methods. Ad hoc bucket brigades were the norm again.
So back to square one, basically.
Pretty much. Crude tools, leather buckets, axes, fire hooks to pull down buildings, and countless medieval towns, built of wood and thatch, narrow streets. They just burned to the ground again and again.
A long interlude, you called it.
Yeah.
It really shows how fragile that kind of institutional knowledge is, doesn't it? And how linked it is to overall societal organization.
Absolutely. When cities declined, so did complex public services like organized firefighting.
So after centuries of this regression, what finally jolted Europe back towards organized fire protection? Must have been something big.
Something very big. The Great Fire of London in 1666. London was basically a tinderbox waiting to happen.
How so?
Timber-framed houses packed together, narrow streets, and it had been a long, dry summer. It started in a bakery on Pudding Lane, fanned by a strong wind.
And the city's response? Still bucket brigades.
Woefully inadequate. Equipment was primitive. And crucially, the Lord Mayor hesitated on ordering demolitions to create fire breaks. A fatal delay.
How bad was it?
The fire raged for 4 days. It destroyed something like 80% of the walled city. 13,000 houses, St. Paul's Cathedral, gone.
The cost must have been astronomical.
Unimaginable. Around £10 million. To put that in perspective, London's entire annual income back then was only about £12,000.
Ouch. That kind of economic hit, it forces change, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It was a complete system failure, exposing just how bad an uncoordinated approach was. The sheer scale of the economic devastation created a powerful financial incentive for change that simply hadn't existed before. Chaos is expensive.
And that incentive led to?
Fire insurance. Out of those ashes, a new economic model emerged. In 1667, just a year later, Nicholas Barbin established the Fire Office, the first company to insure buildings against fire.
Okay, insurance makes sense, but how did that connect to actual firefighting?
To protect their investments, these new insurance companies created their own private fire brigades.
Ah, so the insurers ran the fire trucks. That's wild.
It is fascinating, isn't it? These private brigades were paid by the insurance companies. They'd respond to fires at properties insured by their company.
How did they know which buildings were theirs?
They used something called a fire mark. It was a metal plaque, basically, fixed to the building, showing which company insured it.
So if your building didn't have the right mark, tough luck. Is that urban myth true?
There's that myth they'd let rivals' properties burn, yeah. But the historical evidence is a bit more nuanced. Often, they would fight fires at uninsured buildings, either to stop the fire spreading to their insured properties nearby, or sometimes they'd charge a fee on the spot.
Makes sense. Fire spreads.
Exactly. The logic of containment often trumped a strict business contract.
So this system of competing private for-profit brigades was the main way London handled fires for how long?
About 150 years. Safety became a private commodity, symbolized by that fire mark.
But it sounds inherently inefficient. Competing brigades focusing only on specific buildings.
It absolutely was plagued by inefficiencies and rivalries. As you said, fire doesn't respect property lines. Protecting only specific buildings is, well, illogical. There was, as one observer put it, a want of concert.
So what happened? Did they just keep competing?
Eventually, no. They started to consolidate. In 1833, they formed the Unified London Fire Engine Establishment, the LFEE. But the real tipping point came later.
Another fire.
Another massive one, the Tooley Street Fire in 1861. It was so costly that it finally convinced the insurance companies that the burden of protecting the whole metropolis was just too great for them alone.
So they threw in the towel?
Essentially, yes. In 1866, the LFEE became the Public Metropolitan Fire Brigade. It marked the ultimate failure of the purely private model for a major city. Back to the Roman idea. Effective fire protection needs a centralized, unified public service.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic. European settlers arrive in North America, bringing wood construction And fire risk. How did things develop there? Different from London.
Very different in spirit initially. Early colonies are constantly under threat. Boston passed America's first fire ordinance way back in 1631, banning wooden chimneys, thatched roofs. So right away you see this mix of government regulation and civic participation.
Civic participation, like the bucket brigades.
Exactly. New Amsterdam appointed fire wardens in 1648. Boston had the rattle watch in 1654, volunteers patrolling to sound alarms. And the main method was the bucket brigade. It was a civic duty. Homeowners were legally required to own fire buckets and respond to alarms. You could be fined if you didn't.
So very community-focused from the start. But wasn't there an early paid department, too?
Yes, that's a crucial point often missed. Boston, again. After a big fire in 1679, the city actually imported a fire engine from England and paid a fire chief and 12 firefighters to operate it.
1679. That's early.
It is. It shows the concept of paid municipal firefighting was there early on, even though the volunteer model dominated for over a century afterwards.
But the big name in colonial firefighting is Benjamin Franklin, right? In Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Franklin was the driving force. He'd seen destructive fires and really pushed his fellow citizens to form a dedicated force. In 1736, he founded the Union Fire Company.
How was Franklin's company different from, say, those early Boston efforts?
The key difference was the principle. Unlike some earlier private fire clubs, Franklin founded his company on the idea of protecting the entire community, not just members, not just specific streets. That really resonated with the emerging American Republican spirit, the public good.
So it was more formal.
Organized.
Much more. It had a charter, regular meetings, specific roles. Each member had to provide 6 leather buckets and, interestingly, 2 linen bags for rescuing property. Rescuing property, too, not just fighting the fire. Smart.
Very. And the model was incredibly successful. It spread rapidly. You had many prominent founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson serving as volunteer firefighters. It gave the role immense prestige.
And Franklin didn't stop there, did he? He also started an insurance company.
He did. In 1752, he founded the first successful fire insurance company in the U.S. So he created this whole system of community resilience, prevention, response, and insurance.
Moving into the 19th century, these volunteer companies became more than just fire brigades, didn't they? Almost like social hubs.
Oh, absolutely. They became central institutions, social clubs, definitely, but also political power bases, especially in growing cities.
And at the heart of it was this idea of brotherhood.
A very powerful culture of brotherhood, yes. Forged in shared danger, intense loyalty. That cohesion was vital when things got dangerous.
But that brotherhood had a dark side too, right? Fiercely competitive, even violent.
Extremely. Rival companies, often based on neighborhoods or ethnic groups, would literally race each other to fires.
Race? Like actually race the engines?
Yes. And they'd even break out into brawls over who got to use the hydrant or who had the honor of fighting the blaze. Sabotage between companies wasn't uncommon either.
Fighting each other instead of the fire. That seems counterproductive.
Massively. It was this intense, rowdy culture, really a microcosm of Jacksonian America, democratic, boisterous, but also deeply divided.
And exclusive.
Very much so. The firehouse was strictly a male domain, and that ideal of brotherhood tragically didn't extend to everyone. Women were excluded, of course, but so were African Americans, systematically barred from white companies and often prevented from even forming their own.
So this complex figure emerges the volunteer firefighter. Heroic, celebrated in popular culture like Old Moe's.
Like this larger-than-life folk hero.
But also part of this rowdy, often violent and discriminatory system.
Exactly. That dual identity civic hero and disorderly ruffian was the reality. And eventually the violence and the political maneuvering led to calls for change. Calls for a more disciplined professional force, especially in the big cities.
Which brings us to the impact of technology. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw huge changes, right?
A massive technological revolution that completely reshaped firefighting. Every innovation, pumps, hoses, breathing gear, didn't just make them better at fighting fires, it changed the whole structure and culture.
Let's start with the pumps. Before steam, it was all muscle power.
Right. The hand pumper was the main tool for over a century. Required huge crews, like 20, 30 guys pumping furiously.
Exhausting work. Then came steam.
Steam was the true revolution. The first steam-powered fire engine was actually invented in London, 1829, by John Braithwaite.
That you mentioned resistance earlier. Volunteers didn't like it.
Fierce resistance. They saw it correctly as a threat to their large numbers and social standing. Took a while to catch on.
Where did it finally take hold?
Cincinnati, in the U.S., in the 1850s. The city was absolutely plagued by volunteer chaos. So 1852, they commissioned an inventor, Alexander Moses Latta, to build a practical steam pumper, the famous Uncle Joe Ross.
And it worked.
It was a game changer, a truly disruptive technology. Pulled by powerful horses, it could shoot a continuous high-pressure stream of water much farther and stronger than any hand pumper crew could manage.
So fewer people needed. How did that change things organizationally?
Profoundly. Hand pumpers needed big volunteer crews. Steamers needed a small, skilled crew to operate the engine. This created a really powerful argument for replacing the big volunteer groups with smaller paid professional departments. It basically forced the issue of municipalization in American cities.
Steam changed the pumping. What changed the getting there?
The internal combustion engine, gasoline power, that revolutionized response speed.
Were there bumps in the road there too? Sabotage?
Oh yeah, early experiments faced resistance, even sabotage. But the reliable gasoline engine eventually won out. Around 1905, 1906, companies like Knox and Waterous started producing factory-built motorized fire engines.
And the advantages were just too big to ignore.
Undeniable. Faster response, more reliable than horses, could carry more water, more equipment. The transition was surprisingly swift. By about 1925, the romantic era of the fire horse was basically over.
Which really cemented that professionalization process the steam engine started. And sadly, goodbye to the firehouse Dalmatians running with the horses.
A cultural shift, for sure. But engines weren't the whole story technologically.
Right, you need hoses, ladders.
Exactly. Supporting tech was critical. Jan van der Heyden invented the first practical fire hose back in 1672 that freed firefighters from bucket brigades. Then the invention of standardized hose couplings in 1821 meant they could connect sections, giving tactical flexibility.
And getting water up. Cities were getting taller.
Which led to the aerial ladder, invented by Daniel Hayes in San Francisco in 1868, essential for high-rise rescue and firefighting.
And the water source itself, not just rivers or wells.
Integrated city infrastructure. The post-type fire hydrant, credited to Frederick Graff in Philadelphia around 1801, led to networks of hydrants providing reliable, high-pressure water right where it was needed. Firefighting became part of the city's network systems.
Okay, all crucial. But you mentioned one piece of tech having the most profound impact on safety and tactics.
Without a doubt, the self-contained breathing apparatus, the SCBA.
Breathing underwater, well, under smoke.
Exactly. Before SCBA, going deep inside a burning building with all that toxic smoke, almost impossible, extremely dangerous.
I heard firefighters used to grow long beards.
They did. They'd soak them in water and clench them in their teeth, hoping it would somehow filter the smoke. A pretty futile gesture, really.
So when did effective breathing apparatus arrive?
The modern era really starts after World War II. Scott Aviation adapted oxygen equipment they'd made for bomber crews. In 1945, they introduced the Scott Air Pack.
And that changed everything.
Fundamentally. This open-circuit compressed air SCBA enabled modern interior attack. It allowed firefighters to safely enter burning buildings, push towards the heart of the fire, and systematically search for anyone trapped inside.
So it wasn't just about firefighter safety, it changed how they fought fires.
Completely redefined the relationship between the firefighter and the fire environment. It shifted the profession from primarily exterior containment, trying to stop it from spreading, to interior assault and rescue. It's arguably the single most critical piece of life-saving equipment for a modern firefighter.
So we have the technology forcing change, the social issues with volunteers. This all leads to a big shift in the mid to late 19th century, right? The move to paid departments.
Exactly. It wasn't just one thing, but a convergence. Technology like the steamer made the volunteer model less practical.
The insurance companies wanted more reliability.
Definitely. They were frustrated by the inefficiency, the brawls. They pushed hard for disciplined, municipally controlled forces to protect their investments.
And the public was getting tired of the rowdiness.
Public nuisance, absolutely. By the 1850s, many volunteer firehouses had become more like clubhouses for, well, local rowdies and street gangs. The violent clashes were a major headache. People wanted order.
And the politicians saw an opportunity.
They did. Volunteer companies held real political sway, controlling votes. Municipal governments saw professionalization as a way to break that power and consolidate their own authority over city services. It was institutionalization, centralization, replacing a social model with one based on efficiency and public accountability.
Is there a city that really exemplifies this whole transition?
Cincinnati in 1853 is the classic example. We mentioned them getting the first practical seamer, the Uncle Joe Ross.
Right, because the volunteers were so chaotic.
Precisely. There was a fire in 1851 where 10 different volunteer companies ended up fighting each other instead of the fire. A total public spectacle. That was the last straw.
So the city council steps in.
Spurred on by business leaders, they commissioned Latta's steam engine. Then, using the fact that it needed a skilled crew as justification, they did something radical. They disbanded the entire volunteer system, just like that.
Wow, bold move.
And created a new, fully paid fire department to operate the steamer and protect the city. It set the precedent. Other major cities, Boston, New York, St. Louis, soon followed.
But the volunteer spirit didn't die out completely, did it? It's still huge in the U.S. today.
Oh, absolutely not. Around 70% of America's firefighters today are still volunteers, mainly protecting suburban and rural areas. But they face immense pressures now.
What kind of pressures?
Well, the mission has expanded massively. We'll talk more about EMS and hazmat, but volunteers are expected to handle all that too. Training requirements are intense, far beyond just basic firefighting.
And people are busier.
Exactly. Less free time for extensive training and responding to calls. So you see declining membership in many places, rising call volumes, and an aging volunteer workforce.
Which forces another kind of transition.
Yes. Many communities are having to move towards combination departments, a mix of paid staff and volunteers, or even fully career departments. It's financially tough and culturally complex, integrating those two models. It just shows that professionalization is still an ongoing process, driven by the job's demands outpacing the traditional volunteer capacity.
Okay, so departments professionalized, but the job itself kept changing too. You mentioned the all hazards responder. How did that happen?
It's been a dramatic transformation over the last century or so, from just fire suppression to this multifaceted role. And it wasn't really planned. It was more reactive adaptation to new societal risks.
Like emergency medical services, EMS, firefighters always did some first aid, but this was different.
Much different. The formal integration of EMS is relatively recent. The big catalyst was a landmark report in 1966 called Accidental Death and Disability, the neglected disease of modern society, often just called the white paper.
What did it find?
Something shocking, actually. It found that a soldier wounded on a battlefield in Vietnam had a better chance of survival than someone injured in a car accident back home in the U.S.
That's staggering. Why?
Largely due to the lack of standards, training, and organization in civilian ambulance services at the time. It was often just undertakers with station wagons.
So the report pushed for change.
Big time. It led to federal standards for EMS, a national EMT curriculum. And the fire service was the logical place to deliver this new level of care.
Why of the fire service specifically?
They had stations strategically located throughout communities, existing radio systems, and critically, a culture built around rapid response. Programs in Miami, Seattle, L.A. pioneered it and proved it worked.
And then popular culture played a role.
A massive role. The 1970s TV show Emergency had a huge impact. When it premiered in 1972, there were only a handful of paramedic programs nationwide. By the time it went off the air a few years later, paramedics were operating in every state.
So TV drove public demand?
Immensely. Taking on EMS was arguably the single biggest transformation in the fire service's history. It completely changed their day-to-day, went from occasional high-risk fires to constant high-frequency medical calls. Today, EMS is the vast majority of calls for most departments.
Okay, so EMS was huge. What was the next big expansion? Hazardous materials.
Hazmat, yes. As America's industrial and chemical use grew, so did the risk. There were early incidents, but formal hazmat response really kicked off in the 1980s.
Was there a specific event that triggered that?
Several, but catastrophic accidents really drove it home, like a propane railcar explosion in Kingman, Arizona in 1973. It became brutally clear that traditional firefighting tactics were useless, often deadly, against major chemical incidents.
So a whole new approach was needed.
Completely different. Science-based. Federal agencies developed regulations, training standards, leading to specialized hazmat teams within fire departments.
What kind of training do they need?
Hundreds of hours. Advanced chemistry, toxicology, they use specialized gear like those fully encapsulating suits you see.
Moon suits.
Pretty much. And the threat of terrorism, especially chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosive CBRNE threats after September 11th, really accelerated the development and funding of these teams.
So it shifted the enemy again from visible fire to often invisible chemical threats.
Exactly. Solidified that all hazards identity.
Beyond fires and chemicals, there's also technical rescue, right? Stuff like confined spaces, building collapses.
Right. As the built environment got more complex, you needed specialists for rescues beyond typical fires. The Fire Department of New York actually started this early establishing rescue company number 1 back in 1915.
1915, what did they do?
Handle the odd jobs beyond normal firefighting. Initially staffed by guys with skilled trades backgrounds, ironworkers, carpenters who brought unique skills.
And that idea evolved?
Over the 20th century, absolutely. With more high-rises, complex industrial sites, technical rescue now covers a whole range of low-frequency but very high-risk situations. High-angle rope rescue, confined space, trench collapse, structural collapse. Each needs special tools and extensive training.
And it became more formalized.
Yes. In 1990, FDNY consolidated these specialized units under a Special Operations Command, or SOC. That term and concept are now used across the country. It formalizes that inherent firefighter can-do attitude with standardized procedures and advanced gear. It really underscores their role as the agency of last resort for the most dangerous, complex situations.
It's amazing how the role has just kept expanding. Let's talk about the image. The firefighter holds this really unique place in the public mind, doesn't it? Going way back.
For centuries, yes. Back to the volunteer era, being elevated to folk hero status. You mentioned Old Mose earlier, that fictional New York volunteer. He became a national pop culture icon, brawling, larger-than-life, the urban knight.
Celebrated in prints and stories.
Widely. But then, for much of the 20th century, while still respected, firefighters maybe became a bit invisible in popular culture compared to, say, police officers.
Until September 11th, 2001.
Exactly. That day changed everything for public perception.
Those images.
Yeah.
The FDNY firefighters charging into the Twin Towers as everyone else was fleeing.
Indelible. And the ultimate sacrifice of the 343 members of the FDNY who died that day. It just catapulted the profession to this unprecedented level of global reverence. They became instant international symbols of courage, of selflessness.
And that admiration persists, right? They always rank highly in polls about trusted professions.
Consistently among the most trusted. There's something about the archetype, the protector, fighting a force of nature, not a human enemy, that taps into a really powerful societal need. It's seen as purely altruistic.
But inside the fire service itself, there's this strong traditional culture. You mentioned the brotherhood.
Very powerful, very insular culture, steeped in tradition. Customs like the push-in ceremony for a new engine, the Maltese cross symbol. These are cherished links to the past. And at the core is that brotherhood, that tight-knit, almost familial bond forged in shared danger.
But you also pointed out the paradox, that same insularity.
Has a darker side. Historically, the firehouse was very much an outpost of masculinity, resistant to change. Even today, fire departments remain overwhelmingly white and male compared to the communities they serve.
Just so the brotherhood that provides strength can also be a barrier?
Precisely. It has made it difficult for women and people of color to not just enter the fire service, but to thrive within it. That duality is the central challenge. The very traits that contribute to effectiveness on the fire ground have created significant social and diversity issues within the institution.
It's striking how much of this history seems driven by disaster. You mentioned London, Chicago.
It's undeniable. Progress in firefighting, the tactics, the policy, the technology, has rarely been proactive. It's almost always reactive. A ledger written in catastrophic fires that expose vulnerabilities and force change.
The Great Fire of London led to insurance and building codes.
The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 is why we have National Fire Prevention Week every October.
The Iroquois Theater Fire in 1903.
Horrific fire in Chicago. Led to mandates for outward opening exit doors with panic bars in public buildings.
Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911.
A pivotal moment for workplace safety. That fire spurred sweeping safety laws, fire escapes, sprinkler requirements.
And more recently, wildfires.
Absolutely. The 2018 Camp Fire in California, the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in the state's history, has forced a massive rethinking of wildfire prevention, responsibility, land use planning, especially in the wildland-urban interface.
So these great fires act as focusing events. They cut through indifference.
They do. They overcome political inertia, public apathy, by making the cost of inaction brutally clear. They create these windows of opportunity for real change. That reactive cycle, driven by tragedy, is just a fundamental recurring theme throughout this whole history. When you look back, the history of the firefighter is really a story of remarkable adaptation, isn't it?
It really is.
From Rome's organized cohorts to the American volunteer brotherhoods, the impact of the Industrial Revolution's machines, right up to the scientific specialization we see today. The fire service has just continually evolved to meet whatever society's changing risks were.
And now, moving into the 21st century, it feels like they're facing another set of massive challenges demanding more transformation.
No question. Climate change is a huge one. Fueling wildfires, extreme weather events on a scale we've never seen before, pushing traditional tactics and resources right to the absolute limit.
And technology continues to evolve too. Drones, AI.
Technology will play an increasingly critical role. Drones for situational awareness, robotics for dangerous entries, artificial intelligence may be helping predict fire behavior or manage resources.
Yep.
It could revolutionize how fires are understood and thought.
And the mission keeps broadening.
It does. Becoming, as we said, the de facto health and safety net for communities. Responding to social crises like homelessness, the opioid epidemic, things far removed from traditional firefighting.
Which demands a different kind of firefighter.
A new kind of firefighter, yes. Still needing the tactical skills, of course, but also needing the training, the emotional intelligence, the communication skills to handle these really complex human-centered problems.
So it's incredible. Looking back at this journey, bucket brigades to hazmat suits, you really have to wonder, don't you? How will that fundamental human impulse, that need to confront chaos, combined with all these new societal needs and technologies, how will that shape the next chapter for this absolutely essential service?
That's the big question moving forward. Join us next time on Seeking History for another deep dive into the fascinating stories that shaped our world.